The old cargo ship creaked as Hansel walked through its empty halls. His boots made soft tapping sounds on the metal floor. The air smelled like oil and dust. He hadn't seen anyone else on board for hours, which was exactly how he liked it. Just another day fixing broken ships, he said to himself, adjusting the tool belt around his waist. The ship's owners had left it at Space Station K-227 3 days ago, asking for repairs but never coming back. Now it was Hansel's job to figure out what was wrong with it. He pulled out his scanner, watching the blue light move across the walls. The device beeped steadily, showing nothing unusual, until... Asterisk scratch. Scratch. Whimper, asterisk. Hansel stopped. He turned off his scanner and listened carefully. There it was again, a soft scratching sound coming from somewhere behind the walls. In his 15 years as a mechanic, he had found many strange things in abandoned ships, but something about this sound made his heart beat faster. "Hello," he called out, not really expecting an answer. "Is someone there?" The scratching stopped. Then came a sound that made his skin tingle, something that sounded like two very small creatures crying. Hansel pulled a light from his belt and shined it along the wall. These old cargo ships often had hidden compartments where crews kept extra supplies, or sometimes not so legal cargo. After a few minutes of searching, his fingers found a small crack in the metal paneling. "Got you," he whispered, pulling out his multi-tool. It took him 5 minutes to get the panel loose, and what he saw inside made him gasp. Two small creatures huddled in the corner of the tiny space. They looked a bit like puppies, but their skin was covered in scales that shifted colors like oil on water. Each had 6 legs ending in soft paws, and their large eyes glowed faintly in the dark. They were pressed against each other, shaking so hard their teeth chattered. "Hey there, little ones," Hansel said softly, keeping his voice gentle. "It's okay. I won't hurt you." The creature's eyes grew wider, and their shaking got worse. Hansel could see their ribs through their scaled skin. They looked like they hadn't eaten in days. He slowly reached into his lunchbox and pulled out a protein bar. The creatures watched his every move. When he unwrapped it, their pointed ears perked up at the sound. "Here you go," he said, breaking off a small piece and placing it on the floor of their hiding spot. "It's not much, but it's better than nothing." The smaller of the two creatures stretched out one of its front legs toward the food, still trembling. Its sibling made a soft chirping sound, as if encouraging it. After what seemed like forever, the small one grabbed the piece of protein bar and quickly shared it with its twin. Hansel's heart felt heavy. Someone had left these poor things here to die. The thought made him angry, but he kept his voice calm. "You're safe now," he told them. "I'll take care of you." He noticed something else strange. Every time the creatures shook, tiny sparks of light danced around them, like stars twinkling in space. He had never seen anything like it before. Pulling out his communicator, Hansel pressed the call button. "Dr. Eugene, are you there? I need your help with something unusual." "Hansel, what is it?" A woman's voice answered. "I'm kind of busy with research." "I found something on the abandoned cargo ship," he interrupted. "Two somethings, actually. They're alive, and I think they're babies. They look like puppies, but different. They keep shaking and making lights." There was a long pause. "Lights, you said?" Dr. Eugene's voice had changed from annoyed to interested. "Don't move. Don't let anyone else see them. I'll be there in 10 minutes. Hansel sat down on the floor near the opening, making himself comfortable. The creatures watched him, still shaking but looking slightly less scared. He broke off another piece of the protein bar and placed it near them. "Don't worry," he told the twins as they carefully took the food. "Whatever you are, wherever you came from, you're not alone anymore." Outside the ship's windows, the stars twinkled in the darkness of space. But for once, Hansel wasn't looking at them. Instead, he watched over two small, shaking creatures who needed his help, wondering what adventures this discovery would bring. Dr. Eugene arrived at the cargo ship exactly 10 minutes later, carrying a large medical bag. Her eyes went wide when she saw the creatures in the hidden compartment. "Hansel," she whispered, "do you have any idea what these are?" He shook his head. The twin creatures were still shaking, but they had eaten 3 more pieces of his protein bar. Now they were watching Dr. Eugene with their glowing eyes, pressing closer to each other. "They're Lumini pups," she said, her voice full of wonder. "I've only seen pictures of them in research papers. They're supposed to be extinct in the wild." She knelt down slowly and pulled out a small device from her bag. When she turned it on, it made a soft humming sound. The pups' shaking got worse. "It's okay," Hansel told them. "She's here to help." He didn't know if they could understand his words, but they seemed to respond to his calm voice. Dr. Eugene's device showed readings in bright green numbers. They're dehydrated and hungry, but otherwise healthy. Their body temperature is normal for their species. She pulled out 2 small packets. "These are nutrient gel packs. They should be safe for Lumini pups." Hansel took the packets and carefully opened one. The gel inside was blue and smelled sweet. He placed both packets near the pups, who sniffed them cautiously. The Lumini were famous for their empathic abilities, Dr. Eugene explained as they watched the pups start to eat. They can sense emotions and even project their own feelings through light displays. That's why they're shaking and making those sparkles. They're terrified. "Who would leave them here?" Hansel asked, feeling angry again. "Rare species traffickers, probably," she said grimly. "Lumini pups are worth a fortune on the black market. Someone must have hidden them here when they got scared of getting caught." The smaller pup finished its gel pack first and made a soft purring sound. Its shaking had lessened slightly. "They need names," Hansel said suddenly. "We can't just keep calling them the pups." Dr. Eugene smiled. "What did you have in mind?" Hansel watched as the tiny lights sparkled around the creatures, reminding him of the night sky. "Dal and Viol," he said. "Moon and Star." The pups' ears twitched at the sound of their new names. The larger one, Dal, actually stopped shaking for a moment and took a small step toward Hansel. "They need a safe place to stay," Dr. Eugene said. "The station has rules about keeping pets, but these aren't ordinary pets. If the traffickers come back, they can stay in my workshop," Hansel said firmly. "I have a small room in the back where I sleep sometimes when working late. It's warm and private." Dr. Eugene nodded. "I'll help you set it up. But Hansel, this is dangerous. Rare species traffickers are not people you want to mess with." "I'm not leaving them alone again," he said. Dal had taken another step toward him, and Viol was watching closely. "Look at them. They're just babies." Just then, Dal reached out one small paw and touched Hansel's hand. A warm feeling spread through his chest, and for a moment, the air around them filled with tiny golden lights. "Incredible," Dr. Eugene breathed. "They're already forming an empathic bond with you. That's why their shaking calms down when you talk to them." It took them an hour to prepare a way to safely move the pups. Hansel made a carrier from an old parts box, lining it with his spare jacket. Dr. Eugene gave them more nutrient gel packs and a small device that would monitor their health. As they walked through the station's quiet corridors, Hansel felt the weight of his decision. He was now responsible for 2 rare, precious lives. The pups were still shaking in their carrier, but each time he looked in to check on them, they would look back at him with trust in their glowing eyes. "You'll need to be careful," Dr. Eugene warned as they reached his workshop. "Don't tell anyone about them. I'll bring more supplies tomorrow and start researching everything I can about caring for Lumini pups." Hansel nodded, already planning how to rearrange his living space. As he set up a comfortable bed for Dal and Viol in his back room, he realized his life would never be the same. But watching the twin pups finally fall asleep, their shaking reduced to a gentle tremor, he knew he had made the right choice. Over the next week, Hansel's workshop changed a lot. He moved his tools to one side and made a special area for Dal and Bail. He built them a soft bed using old cushions and put up small barriers so they wouldn't hurt themselves on any sharp tools. The pups were learning to trust him more each day. Their constant shaking had become less severe, though it never completely stopped. Every morning, Hansel would find them waiting by their food bowl, their scales shimmering with different colors depending on their mood. "Good morning, little ones," he said one morning, placing fresh nutrient gel in their bowl. "Sleep well." Dal, the braver of the twins, bumped his head against Hansel's hand. Immediately, the air filled with tiny blue lights, like floating stars. Hansel had learned this meant they were happy. While he worked on fixing ships, the pups would watch him with curious eyes. Sometimes, they would make soft chirping sounds when he picked up the wrong tool, almost as if they were trying to help. One day, while Hansel was struggling to find a problem in a ship's engine, Bail started making excited noises. The small pup ran to a specific panel and put its paw on it. When Hansel opened that panel, he found the broken part right away. "Well, look at that," he said, smiling. "You're becoming quite the mechanics yourselves." Just then, there was a loud knock at the workshop door. The pups immediately stopped moving, their shaking getting worse. Hansel quickly helped them hide in their special spot behind his workbench. "Come in," he called, making sure the pups were well hidden. Officer Jaiho walked in, looking around the workshop with sharp eyes. "Hansel," he said, "we've had some strange reports about your workshop lately." Hansel kept his face calm, though his heart was beating fast. "Strange how?" "People say they've seen lights through your windows at night. Unusual lights." Officer Jaiho walked around the workshop slowly. "And you've been spending a lot more time here than usual." "I've been busy," Hansel said. "Lots of ships need fixing." Officer Jaiho stopped near the workbench. Dal and Bail were just behind it, and Hansel prayed they would stay quiet. "You know," the officer said, "we take station security very seriously. If anyone's keeping dangerous materials or unauthorized life forms, they could be in big trouble." Just then, a small tool rolled off the workbench, making a loud clang. Officer Jaiho turned quickly toward the sound. But Hansel was faster. He knocked over his entire toolbox, making an even louder noise. "Sorry," he said quickly. "I'm so clumsy today. Let me clean this up." As he bent down to pick up his tools, he could see Dal and Bail pressed against each other, shaking hard. Tiny sparks of scared red light were floating around them, but thankfully, Officer Jaiho was looking the other way. "Well," Officer Jaiho said after watching Hansel clean up, "just remember, we'll be keeping an eye on this place. Any suspicious activity, and we'll have to do a full search." After the officer left, Hansel quickly closed and locked the door. Dal and Bail came out of hiding, running to him and pressing against his legs. The air around them filled with worried purple lights. "It's okay," he told them, kneeling down to pet them. "I won't let anyone take you away." That evening, Dr. Eugene visited with more supplies. When Hansel told her about Officer Jaiho's visit, she looked worried. "We need to be more careful," she said, watching as Bail helped Dal clean his scales. "The pups' light displays are beautiful, but they could give them away. Maybe we can set up some kind of shield around the windows." Hansel nodded, but he was distracted by something new. The pups were playing with a small piece of metal, rolling it back and forth between them. Every time it moved, they would make the lights change color in time with its movement. "They're getting stronger," Dr. Eugene said, smiling. "And they trust you completely now. Look, they're barely shaking at all when you're near them." Hansel watched his two small friends play, their scales glittering in the workshop's light. He knew keeping them safe would be hard, but seeing them happy made everything worth it. Tomorrow, he would work on covering the windows and making their home even safer. For now, though, he just enjoyed watching Dal and Bail create their beautiful light show. their fear forgotten in the joy of play. Dr. Yujin sat at her computer, surrounded by old books and glowing screens. She had been researching Lumini pups for days now, trying to learn everything she could about Dal and Bile species. Hansol, she called through her communicator. You need to see this. Can you come to my office? 20 minutes later, Hansol arrived. The pups were safely hidden in his workshop with enough food and water for the day. Look at this, Dr. Yujin said, pointing to her screen. I found an old report about the Lumini. They weren't just rare, they were special. Their empathic abilities made them valuable partners to space travelers. They could sense danger before it happened. Hansol thought about how the pups had helped him find problems in the ships he was fixing. That explains a lot, he said. But there's more, Dr. Yujin continued. 5 years ago, a group of traffickers started hunting them. They sold Lumini pups to rich collectors for huge amounts of money. The parents would try to hide their babies. But she stopped, looking sad. That's what happened to Dal and Bile's parents. Hansol asked quietly. She nodded. Probably. The traffickers have a symbol, a broken star. Did you see anything like that on the cargo ship where you found them? Before Hansol could answer, his communicator beeped. It was a message from his workshop's security system. Someone was trying to get in. I have to go, he said quickly, standing up. But Dr. Yujin grabbed his arm. Wait, she said. Look at this security camera feed. She typed quickly on her computer, bringing up a view of the station's main dock. A large ship had just arrived. On its side was a symbol, a broken star. Hansol's heart started beating faster. The traffickers, he whispered. They're here. Just then, Officer Jaiho walked into Dr. Yujin's office without knocking. Hansol and Dr. Yujin quickly turned off the screens, but they were too late. What's so interesting? Officer Jaiho asked, looking at them carefully. Just some old research papers, Dr. Yujin said calmly. About space travel. Officer Jaiho didn't look convinced. Really? Because I've been watching Hansol's workshop for days now. Strange lights, unusual noises, and now secret meetings. Something's going on, and I need to know what it is. Hansol thought quickly. The pups were alone in his workshop. If the traffickers found them while he was stuck here. Just then, his communicator lit up again. This time, it wasn't an alert. It was a picture. Somehow, Dal and Bile had managed to send him an image from the workshop. It showed 3 strange men trying to look through his workshop windows. Officer Jaiho saw the picture too. His eyes went wide. What are those creatures in the reflection? He asked, pointing to where Dal and Bile's shapes could be faintly seen in the window. Hansol knew he had to make a choice. The pups were in danger, and he needed help. He looked at Dr. Yujin, who nodded slightly. Officer Jaiho, Hansol said, I need to tell you something. But first, I need to know, will you help protect them? Protect who? The last 2 Lumini pups in the galaxy. They're in my workshop right now, and the people who killed their parents just found them. Officer Jaiho was quiet for a long moment. Then he pulled out his official station security badge. Show me everything, he said, and tell me who we're up against. For the next 10 minutes, Hansol and Dr. Yujin quickly explained about finding the pups, their special abilities, and the traffickers who were hunting them. They showed Officer Jaiho the research about the Lumini species and the broken star symbol. So that's what the lights were, Officer Jaiho said thoughtfully. I've never seen anything like it, and you say they can sense danger. Yes, Hansol said anxiously, which is why we need to get back to the workshop now. Those men in the picture, they're probably the traffickers. Officer Jaiho stood up straight. Then we don't have much time. Dr. Yujin, get all the evidence about these traffickers ready. Hansol, you're with me. Let's go save your pups. As they hurried through the station's corridors, Hansol silently promised Dal and Bile that he would protect them. He just hoped they would get there in time. Hansol's workshop was quiet when they arrived. Too quiet. Officer Jaho pulled out his security scanner, while Hansol unlocked the door with shaking hands. Inside, tools were scattered everywhere. Hansol's heart nearly stopped when he saw the pup's bed was empty. But then he noticed something. Tiny sparkles of blue light coming from inside an old engine part. "Dal? Bayol," he whispered. 2 pairs of glowing eyes peeked out. The pups had hidden themselves inside the engine, just like they'd been trained to do. They were shaking harder than ever, but they were safe. "Smart pups," Officer Jaiho said quietly. They knew to hide. Suddenly, they heard footsteps in the hallway. Hansol quickly closed the workshop door most of the way, leaving just a small crack to see through. 3 men walked past, led by a tall figure in an expensive black coat. "They have to be here somewhere," the tall man said. His voice was soft but cruel. "Those Lumini pups are worth more than this entire station. Find them." Officer Jaiho pulled out his communicator. "This is Officer Jaiho," he whispered. "I need backup at Workshop Section 7. Silent approach. We have unauthorized intruders." The pups were making frightened chirping sounds now. Red sparks of fear filled the air around their hiding place. Hansol wanted to comfort them, but he knew they had to stay hidden. "Boss," one of the men called out. "Look at this." He was pointing at the small lights floating near the engine. Hansol's blood went cold. The pups' fear was giving away their location. But before the traffickers could get closer, Dr. Eugène's voice came over the station's speaker system. "Attention all station personnel. Security scan in progress. All members must report to the main hall immediately. Anyone found in restricted areas will be arrested." The traffickers stopped. The tall man in the black coat looked angry. "We'll come back," he said. "Those pups are here somewhere. I can feel it." After the traffickers left, Hansol rushed to the engine where Dal and Bayol were hiding. The pups jumped into his arms, trembling so hard he could barely hold them. "It's okay," he said softly. "You're safe now." "That was close," Officer Jaiho said. "But they'll be back. That man in the black coat, I recognize him. His name is Kangda. He's one of the most wanted criminals in this sector." Hansol held the pups tighter. "What do we do?" "We set a trap," Officer Jaiho said, smiling. "Those pups can sense danger and create light shows. Maybe we can use that to our advantage." Dr. Eugène arrived a few minutes later. "I've contacted Station Security Command," she said. "They're sending a special team. But we need evidence to arrest the traffickers." "The pups are the evidence," Hansol said. "Look what they can do." He held up his hand, and Dal touched it with his paw. Immediately, beautiful patterns of light filled the air. Then Bayol joined in, and the lights formed images, showing the cargo ship where they had been abandoned. "Incredible," Officer Jaiho breathed. "They're not just making pretty lights. They're telling us their story." The lights change, showing the broken star symbol and the face of Kangda. The pups were sharing their memories, proving who had hurt them. "This is perfect," Dr. Eugène said. "If we can record this, we'll have all the evidence we need." But before they could make a plan, alarms started ringing throughout the station. Red emergency lights flashed in the corridors. "Warning," the station's computer announced. "Unauthorized access detected in security systems. All doors will lock in 5 minutes." "It's Kangda," Officer Jaiho said grimly. "He's hacking the station's computers. If those doors lock, we'll be trapped, and so will our backup." Dal and Bayol looked at each other, then at Hansol. Their shaking had stopped. Instead, their scales were glowing with a bright, determined light. "I think," Hansol said slowly, "the pups have an idea." The twins jumped from his arms and ran to his computer terminal. Their scales started flashing in complex patterns, and suddenly, the station's alarms stopped. "They can interface with machines," Dr. Eugène gasped. "That's how they sent you that picture earlier. They're not just empathic, they're tech-sensitive." Officer Jaiho smiled. Then I think it's time we showed these traffickers what happens when you mess with the wrong mechanic and his alien pups. Han Sol's workshop became their command center. Officer Jai-ho had called in his most trusted security officers, and Dr. Yu Jin brought her best scanning equipment. Dal and Bail sat on Han Sol's workbench, their scales glowing softly as they watched everyone work. Kang Dae and his crew have taken over the east wing of the station, Officer Jai-ho said, pointing to a map on the screen. They've locked down 3 levels and disabled the security cameras there. But they didn't count on our secret weapon, Dr. Yu Jin said, smiling at the pups. Dal and Bail had stopped shaking completely now. Instead, they seemed focused and ready to help. Han Sol watched as the twins walked to the computer terminal again. Their scales began to flash in patterns, and suddenly new information appeared on the screens. They were showing security footage from the East Wing, areas where Kang Dae thought he had disabled all cameras. "Look," one of the security officers said. "They're moving something into that storage room." Big cages. Han Sol felt sick. Those cages are for Dal and Bail. The pups made angry chirping sounds, and the air filled with fierce orange lights. Bail touched the computer screen with one paw, and more images appeared. They showed other places where traffickers had hidden scared baby Lumini. "They're not just showing us the present," Dr. Yu Jin realized. "They're showing us everything they know about the traffickers' operation. This is incredible evidence." Officer Jai-ho quickly started recording everything. "With this, we can shut down their entire network. But first, we need to catch Kang Dae." Just then, the station's lights flickered. Dal and Bail jumped up, their ears straight and alert. Red warning lights started flashing in their scales. "They're trying to hack the main power system," Han Sol said. "If they shut it down, all our doors and life support systems would stop working," Officer Jai-ho finished grimly. But the twins were already moving. They ran to different computers, their paws touching screens and keyboards. Wherever they touched, soft blue lights spread through the machines. They were fighting back against the hackers, protecting the station's systems. "I have an idea," Han Sol said suddenly. "The pups can control the station's computers. What if we use that to trap the traffickers instead of letting them trap us?" Dr. Yu Jin nodded excitedly. "Yes, we could seal them in the East Wing, then shut down their equipment." Officer Jai-ho smiled. "And my team can be waiting to arrest them when they try to break out. But we'll need a distraction to get them all in one place." "I'll be the distraction," Han Sol said firmly. Everyone looked at him in surprise. "Kang Dae wants the pups, so let's let him think he's found them." The twins stopped working and looked at Han Sol with worried eyes. They ran to him, pressing against his legs as golden lights swirled around them. "It's okay," he told them softly. "I won't let them hurt you, but we need to stop them from hurting any other Lumini families. Will you help me?" Dal and Bail looked at each other, seeming to have a silent conversation. Then they both nodded, their scales shimmering with determined blue light. They spent the next hour planning. The pups helped them map out every corridor and room in the East Wing. They showed which systems they could control and where Kang Dae's crew had placed their equipment. "Remember," Officer Jai-ho told his team, "we have to catch them all at once. No one escapes." Station workers who had learned about Dal and Bail came to help too. Some brought food and supplies, while others offered to guard different corridors. Everyone wanted to protect the brave little pups who were fighting back against the traffickers. "Everything's ready," Dr. Yu Jin said finally. "The trap is set." Han Sol knelt down next to Dal and Bail. "Are you ready?" he asked them. The twins touched his hand with their paws. Instead of just lights, this time they created a clear image in the air, a picture of all of them together, safe and happy. It was their way of saying they trusted him. "Then let's go catch some bad guys," Han Sol said, standing up. "It's time to show Kang Dae that he picked the wrong station to attack." Jack walked through the quiet forest. The sun was setting and the air was getting colder. He pulled his jacket tighter around him. The bag of supplies on his back felt heavy. He had been walking for hours, trying to find someplace safe to rest for the night. Suddenly, Jack heard a noise behind him. He turned around quickly. In the dimming light, he saw a pair of glowing eyes staring at him from the bushes. Jack's heart raced. He reached for the knife on his belt. A low growl came from the creature in the shadows. It stepped forward, and Jack saw it was a large wolf. Its gray fur bristled, and its sharp teeth gleamed. Jack held his knife in front of him with a shaking hand. The wolf lunged at Jack, snarling viciously. Jack slashed with his knife, catching the wolf across the face. It yelped in pain and backed away. Jack turned and ran, crashing through the undergrowth. He could hear the wolf chasing after him, its paws thudding on the ground. Jack's lungs burned as he sprinted through the trees. Branches whipped at his face and tore at his clothes. He risked a glance over his shoulder and saw the wolf was still pursuing him. Blood dripped from the cut on its face, but the injury only seemed to enrage the animal further. Up ahead through the trees, Jack spotted an old cabin. He put on a burst of speed, racing towards the shelter. The wolf was nearly on his heels now. Jack leaped onto the porch and grabbed for the door handle. To his immense relief, it turned in his hand, and the door swung open. He hurled himself inside and slammed the door shut just as the wolf's body thudded against it. Jack gasped for breath, his heart hammering in his chest. The wolf scratched at the door and howled in frustration. But the door held firm. He was safe, for the moment at least. Jack slid down to the floor, exhausted. He took stock of his surroundings. The cabin was small, with only a single room, but it had 4 walls and a roof. It would provide shelter for the night. In the morning, he would need to plan his next move carefully. But for now, he let his eyes close as he drifted off to a fitful sleep. When Jack woke up, light was coming in through the cabin's dirty windows. He stood up slowly, his body sore from sleeping on the hard floor. The events of the previous night came rushing back to him. The wolf attacking him, running for his life through the dark forest. Finding this old cabin, Jack walked over to the door and listened carefully. Everything was quiet outside. There was no sound of the wolf or any other animal. He opened the door a crack and peeked out. In the daylight, the forest looked a lot less scary than it had at night. Birds sang in the trees. A light breeze made the leaves dance. Gathering his courage, Jack stepped out of the cabin. He looked around, trying to get his bearings. He wasn't sure which direction he had come from in his panicked run. All he knew was that he needed to keep moving and find help. Jack picked a direction and started walking. The sun climbed higher in the sky as the day wore on. His stomach rumbled with hunger. He chewed a few edible plants he found along the way, but it did little to satisfy him. His water bottle was nearly empty too. As night began to fall again, Jack started to despair that he would ever find his way out of these woods. But then, through the trees ahead, he saw a glimmer of light. His spirits lifted, and he hurried towards it. He came out of the forest to find a small town nestled in a valley. Lights shone warmly from the windows of houses and shops. People walked along the streets, going about their business. Jack nearly wept with relief. He stumbled into the town, drawing curious glances from the locals. He made his way to what looked like a small inn. A kind-looking woman greeted him. "Can I help you?" she asked, taking in his ragged appearance with concern. "Please," Jack said, his voice hoarse. "I'm lost. I've been wandering in the woods. I was attacked by a wolf. I need a place to stay and something to eat." The woman's face softened with sympathy. "Of course, come in," she said. "We'll get you a room and some warm food. You're safe now. Everything will be all right." Jack nearly collapsed with gratitude. After his harrowing ordeal, he had finally found safety and kindness. He knew there was still a long road ahead of him. He would need to find his way back home eventually. But for now, he let the warmth and comfort of the inn envelop him, grateful to be alive and out of danger. Jack sat at a table in the inn's cozy dining room. A plate of hot stew and fresh bread was in front of him. He ate eagerly, savoring each delicious bite. It was the first proper meal he'd had in days. The kind innkeeper, whose name was Sarah, sat across from him. "What brings you to these parts?" Sarah asked. "We don't get many visitors here, especially not ones in such a state as you were." Jack swallowed a mouthful of stew. "I'm a journalist from the city," he explained. "I was writing a story about the old mines in the mountains north of here, but I got lost in the woods on my way. Then I was attacked by that wolf. I've been wandering lost for days." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "Those woods can be dangerous if you don't know your way. And the mines, well, there's a reason they're abandoned. Strange things have happened up there. People have gone missing." A shiver ran down Jack's spine. He remembered the old man in the village who had warned him not to go near the mines. He wished now that he had listened. "I need to get back to the city," Jack said. "Can you help me?" Sarah smiled kindly. "Of course. We'll make sure you get home safe, but you should rest first. You've been through quite an ordeal." Jack felt the exhaustion of the past days catching up with him. He finished his meal and let Sarah show him to a small but comfortable room. He fell asleep as soon as his head hit the pillow. The next day, Sarah introduced Jack to a local man named Tom. Tom was a guide who knew the woods and mountains well. "I can take you back to the city," Tom said. "But we'll have to skirt around the woods and go through the mountain pass. It's longer, but safer." Jack agreed readily. He had no desire to set foot in those woods again. They set off, Jack riding a horse that Sarah lent him. Tom led the way, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area. As they rode, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them from the shadows of the trees. He kept glancing over his shoulder, half expecting to see the wolf or some other beast following them. But he saw nothing. By nightfall, they'd reached the pass. They made camp in a sheltered spot. Jack slept fitfully, his dreams haunted by glowing eyes and snarling teeth. In the morning, they began the climb up the steep mountain trail. It was hard going, but Jack was determined. He focused on putting one foot in front of the other, on the promise of safety and home that lay ahead.